Okay, good afternoon. Is this on? Yeah, I think so.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Yeah, it's on. Okay, brilliant. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's inaugural lecture from Professor Jennifer Cook. Welcome, friends, family and colleagues, both here in the room and those joining us online from home and elsewhere. Thank you. My name is William Bloss and I'm Head of College for Life and Environmental Sciences. And it's my great pleasure to say a few words to open today's lecture and to tell you a little bit about the background that's led Jen to here today. She has been at the University of Birmingham for about 10 years, which she tells me is long enough to remember the old Hills building, an almost Wild West department, apparently, where one could even sneak one's dog in on occasion. We didn't know this. Her journey began a little way before that with an undergraduate degree at the University of Bath, followed by a Wellcome Trust-funded PhD at the UCL Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience, working under the supervision of Professor Sarah Jane Blakemore. She then worked as a postdoctoral research associate in the Department of Psychiatry in Cambridge and as a research associate fellow at Magdalen College. From there, she moved to the Netherlands to take up a postdoc at the Donders Centre for Cognitive Neuroimaging, working with Professor Roshan Kools. She then returned to the UK, working initially at City University in London, before moving here to Birmingham as a Birmingham Fellow. And during her time here has also held visiting professorships in the Donders Centre in the Netherlands, in Japan and in France. Jennifer's research centres on social cognition. She draws on a wide range of methods from motion tracking and neuroimaging to drug studies and genetics, and works with a hugely diverse set of populations, including those with Parkinson's, the autistic community, and perhaps most unexpectedly for me, even honeybees. Her work has been recognised with a number of awards over the years, including prizes for doctoral research, supervision, and more recent research achievements. But Jennifer tells me what makes her proudest is her research group and her team. Her greatest joy lies in watching members find their niche and flourish. And every student she has supervised has gone on to win a prize or a prestigious fellowship, which is a pretty good record. She considers herself incredibly lucky to work with brilliant and kind people who nurture and support one another every day, which I thought was a really nice way of looking at things. Beyond her own lab and her research, Jennifer has served the community, including sitting on ERC panels, the Experimental Psychology Society Committee, and as Associate Editor of Royal Society Open Science. And I know Jennifer best in her role as Deputy Director of Research for the College, a role she's held for the last 2 years. However, I understand among colleagues, she's also known for her annual "The Goose is Getting Fat" email, which apparently emerges shortly before Christmas every year, and also apparently includes promises stroke invitations to get up and sing. So the question is, will this be the year? Please join me in congratulating Jennifer on her promotion and welcome to her inaugural lecture, I Like the Way You Move, Movement, Dopamine and Social Connection.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction, Bill, and thank you so much everyone for coming here today. Also, I know that there are a lot of people that are joining online that really wanted to be here, and just thank you for trying, and I'm sending you lots of love through the screen. So I'm going to give a kind of classic inaugural lecture today, where I walk you through my research journey. And I also thought that what I would do is kind of pause at different points along the way and say thank you to people that have been important at different turning points in my research journey. So I thought I would start by saying a thank you. And I wanted to start by saying thank you to my parents, Helen and Stuart. Thank you so much for providing the sort of upbringing that paved the way to become an academic. I know that not everybody has that sort of upbringing and gets those opportunities in life, and I'm really grateful for it. And I was reflecting, when I was writing these lectures, I was reflecting on what is it about my childhood that kind of like paved the way to become an academic of all things. And I was thinking that every weekend, maybe not every weekend, but lots of weekends, I feel that my parents took me and my brother to Ilkeston Library. And, you know, we had those little orange library cards. Did everybody have those around the country? And you could get out 3 books, which was so exciting. And then after we had our 3 books, my parents would take us to the local market and Dad would buy us a bag of chocolate raisins. And this, you know, this was like a formative experience of my life that really, it really like imbued in me a strong love of reading, which has stood me in great stead throughout my career. And I also think, don't you think that this showed, from my dad's point of view, an excellent working knowledge of associative learning? Yeah. I don't know if I really love reading or if I just love chocolate raisins. Sometimes I read and eat chocolate raisins at the same time to keep the association alive. So I was a bookworm when I was a kid, and I just loved books and reading and stories, and I did not like maths and I did not like science. Oh, who would want to be a scientist? No, no, thank you. And I loved stories because to me they were a way of getting inside somebody else's mind, understanding how they work and how they build their social relations with other people. And eventually, my love of books and reading brought me into psychology, because I distinctly remember being in the library at my secondary school, and I was reading Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And the librarian said to me, "Don't you think that Mr. Hyde could be a subconscious part of Dr. Jekyll's mind?" And I was like, what? And she gave me this book on Sigmund Freud and psychoanalysis. And I remember reading this book and being like, oh my gosh, this bloke in Vienna, he gets paid to understand other people's minds and to figure out how they build social relationships. I want to do that when I grow up. And I was probably about 14 or something at the time. And then that's what I did. I was going to say my life was very simple. I mean, no, no one's life is simple. But my transition into academia was simple. I decided I want to be a psychologist, and I went to the University of Bath and I studied psychology as an undergrad. And then I went to UCL and I did a PhD in neuroscience. And at PhD level, I decided that I wanted to study social cognition, or how we build social connections and social relationships with each other. And I did this with the wonderful Sarah Jane Blakemore, who was a brilliant PhD supervisor. So Sarah Jane and I, we studied social connections, and in particular, we focused on the role of imitation. Now, imitation is really important in building our social relationships, because if I were to imitate the body movements of my supervisor, Sarah Jane Blakemore, then this would increase positive feelings of rapport and liking and trust in Sarah Jane. And these positive feelings would then make it more likely that Sarah Jane would imitate my actions. And so in our social relationships, we're imitating each other subtly all of the time. I don't know where that came from. And theory out there that autistic people didn't imitate as much as non-autistic people. So Sarah and I wanted to test this theory, and we did it in the following way. So we asked our participants if they could do this action, and I'd like you all to do this now. So you just have to wave your arm backwards and forwards. And sometimes they would see somebody doing the same thing, but sometimes they would see somebody doing this. And the non-autistic participants started to subtly imitate this movement. You should be doing this, but you're starting to do this, aren't you? But the autistic participants didn't imitate in this situation. So we actually did find these small differences in imitation between autistic and non-autistic people. But really importantly, what we then discovered was that when, with Claire Press, who's over there in the red top, when we looked in detail at exactly what our participants were doing, we found that they were making different movements. So the autistic participants were accelerating and decelerating more rapidly and creating more jerky movements compared to the non-autistic participants. Now, this is important because the thing about imitation is that you're much more likely to imitate something if it is a normal and natural thing for your body to do, if it's already in your motor repertoire. And if it's something that's different from what you normally do, you're not very likely to imitate it. So our autistic participants weren't imitating it because we were showing them unusual movements. And when we showed them movements that were a normal, natural thing for their body to do, things like tapping movements, they imitated just like the non-autistic participants. So the conclusion was that autistic people can imitate just like non-autistic people. But you need to give stimuli that are a normal, natural thing for their body to do. And I'll just sort of take a little pause here, just because I really want to say huge thank you to Sarah Jane Blakemore for being a wonderful PhD supervisor, and also just a generally wonderful champion over the years. And also the many inspiring people that I was working with at that time, like Stephanie Burnett-Hayes, Irwas Dumontai, Kat Sebastian. And also, when I was a PhD student, I was really lucky because I kind of got adopted by another lab, the lab of Celia Hayes. And I learned a lot, in particular from Celia and also from Claire Press, whose name you're going to hear a lot because I've done a lot of work with Claire, and also from Jeff Bird. I mean, I've learned so much from you guys over the years, not just about science, but also about friendship. So thank you so much. And also the other people that were in the lab, like Rich Cook and Caroline Katmer and Jane and Liz. So thank you. Right. So now in this talk, things are not going to necessarily go in chronological order. So that was all back in like 2012. And now we're going to skip forward 6 years-ish, I think, to when I first came to work in the wonderful city of Birmingham, which I love. And when I came to Birmingham, I started to set up my own lab group. So I started to interview people to join the lab with me. And one day I interviewed this charming chap called Dagmar Fraser. And Dagmar said to me, this paper that you published back in 2013, yeah? You've analysed the data all wrong. Which was a very confident move for an interview. But it worked out very well because I said, all right then, smarty pants, come and tell me how to analyse the data properly. And we spent the last 8 years of our life trying to analyse this data, haven't we? So to explain this, I need to tell you a little bit more about movement data. So imagine that we attached a motion tracker to Dagmar's head. And Dagmar, for reasons I cannot explain, is doing something like this with his head, right? So if you looked at his motion data, he would be doing something like that. Ruined my hair. And clever people many years before us figured out that Dagmar's head is moving according to what you might call fundamental laws of biological motion. And these fundamental laws of biological motion enable you to predict very accurately how fast Dagmar's head is going to be going at different points along this trajectory. And what it basically boils down to is that Dagmar is going to swoosh his head very fast along the straight bits, and then he's going to slow down as he goes around the corner, and then fast along the straight bits. And so if you plotted the velocity of his head against the curvature of the trajectory, it would be a negative relationship. And from these equations, you can actually quite accurately predict the gradient of that negative relationship. Dad, I told you I'd put some like engineering stuff into it. Now, these laws of motion are very useful because they not only predict the movement of Dagmar's head, but also the movement of all sorts of different parts of our body and different species and all sorts of different shapes of movement that we could be doing. The thing is that movement data doesn't look clean and tidy like this. It looks kind of noisy and bumpy, something more like this. And what Dagmar figured out is that people, to apply these equations, people are cleaning up the data. And when they're cleaning up the data, they're introducing bias, which may be resulting in these negative gradients between speed and curvature. And so Dagmar's work is sort of calling into question the fundamental existence of these laws of motion. And I've been pulled along with that. It's a very exciting journey. And Dagmar has been building these open access toolboxes so that you can clean up your data with introducing minimal bias. So guys, if you want to do any movement analysis work, please chat to Dagmar. So I have to pause at this stage and say, little Jen might have been wrong. Like, maybe maths is cool, but we'll see about that. In addition to doing this very fundamental mathsy stuff, we also discovered some more things about autistic movement. Because this movement that we looked at back in 2013, this kind of arm swinging movement, it's okay, but it's not a very useful movement, is it? And we wanted to know, what about like more sort of complex and fluid movements that the human body might do? What about the sorts of movements that we might do like in social interaction with each other, or like when we're dancing, or when we're doing handwriting, for example? Like, how are those kinematics in autism? And this is another point at which I was like, okay, now I think maths actually really might be quite cool. And the reason I thought this is because I got introduced to the Fourier transform. Now, people that know what the Fourier transform is will know it's a pretty cool bit of maths. And people that don't, I think that this is the best way to explain it. So, my voice is a sound wave, right? But my voice is a complex wave. So, in my voice, there are some high-pitched frequencies, quite a lot of high-pitched frequencies in my voice, and there are some low-pitched frequencies. And if you take my voice and you put it through a Fourier transform, then it tells you the relative contribution of different frequency bands within my voice. So mine would be quite a lot of high-pitched, not very much low-pitched. Dagmar's would be more low-pitched and not as much high-pitched. Now, the cool thing is that our complex and fluid body movements are also complex waves. And so that means that you can take something like your handwriting and you can feed it through a Fourier transform, and it's going to tell you the relative contribution of different pure frequency shapes within that complex wave. And we realize, well, this is really cool, because if we know that autistic people draw these pure frequency shapes in a different way from non-autistic people, then we can make lots of predictions about how they might do a whole wealth of different body movements, useful things like handwriting or dancing. So, to cut a long story short, we found that autistic adults draw these different pure frequency shapes in a different way from non-autistic adults, in the sense that they move in a more jerky way and they're less smooth and fluid around the different trajectory of the shapes. Alongside doing this project about autistic drawing movements, Connor Keating was also leading on a project about facial expressions. Sorry, Connor. And he was asking our participants if they would pose happy, angry, and sad facial expressions, and then analyzing these movements. And what he found was that autistic people were making facial expressions that were subtly different from non-autistic people. So look, it's not like you can look at somebody's facial expression and be like, that's an autistic facial expression. They're like very subtle differences that you need computer algorithms to pick up on, but they are robust differences. So I've moved to Birmingham, and then we've been doing all of this research about autistic movements. And alongside, you know, we don't work in a vacuum. So sometimes we read the news, you know, and we were seeing that waiting lists to get an autism diagnosis were getting longer and longer and longer. And so like in Oxfordshire, for example, the waiting list is up to 18 years and a lot of clinics have closed now. So we start to think, maybe some of this research that we've been doing can help with the waiting list situation. Now, I definitely do not think that you can diagnose autism by just looking at somebody's body movements. I don't want anybody to think that I'm saying that. But if we can do anything to kind of speed up these waiting lists, or maybe even just flag people that are on the waiting list that could do with a bit of additional support, then I think that would be great. And this is what we came up with. So Connor and I developed a smartphone app where people have to basically draw different shapes in order to help the sea creatures. So here you have to draw around the shark's fin because he's got a poorly fin and you have to make him feel better. And in the second game, you have to pull facial expressions to help the citizens of Emotopia communicate with each other and help each other out. We've been trialing this smartphone app now with different genders and different people from different ethnic backgrounds. And we find that it can say whether somebody is autistic or non-autistic with over 92% accuracy. And we're really happy that we've just started to develop some collaborations with healthcare service providers. And so we hope that it will be in services within the next year or two. So well done, Connor, and thank you for all your work on that. So I want to just pause here and say thank you to all of the people that have been involved in this kind of batch of work, particularly Dagmar and Connor, and also Sophie, because Sophie started us off with all of the facial expression recording and analysis stuff. So thank you so much for all of that work. And also a huge thank you to BPAR Autism Consultancy, and in particular, Matt Bond, who played a big role in helping us to set that up here at the University of Birmingham, and who might not remember this, but in an early meeting mentioned something about autistic individuals and challenges with handwriting, and that really kind of spurred on and gave us lots of ideas for this project. So thank you, Matt. And also thank you for the many years of friendship that have come out of that. Okay, so I did say I was going to talk about social interaction, and then I just really talked about movements for the last 15 minutes or so. So how do I bring this back round to talk about social interaction? Well, our movements are very much important in social interaction. You know, our facial expressions are important in helping us to tell other people how we're feeling. You know, here I'm clearly delighted in this first picture. In this second picture, I think it's Christmas Day, and I think I'm trying to tell my mum that I'm worried that the turkey's been in the oven for too long. And this last one, I mean, that just goes to show your facial expressions are not always as transparent as you think they are. I've got no idea what is going on in my little mind. I can only imagine that I'm horrified at the pattern clash between the dress and the carpet. So our facial expressions are important, but, you know, going back to my PhD work, what we showed there was kind of an important role of similarity. You know, you imitate movements that are similar to your movements, but not movements that are really different from your movements. So in the work that we've done about facial expressions, we started to want to know if that's also the case with facial expressions. And so we did a study that we thought would be really simple and straightforward, where we asked people to say a sentence like, my name is Joe and I'm a scientist. And they would say it in a happy, angry, or sad way. So they'd be like, my name is Joe and I'm a scientist. Or no, my name is Joe and I'm a scientist. Brilliant. Brilliant study. And then we thought, okay, what we want to do with these facial expressions is quantify them. We want to put numbers on those movements. Like, what is it that people are doing differently when they're expressing sadness compared to when they're expressing anger? And we thought, well, that'll be easy because there's loads of facial expression algorithms out there in the world. We'll just take one and then we'll put the videos through the algorithm and the answer will pop out. Turns out a lot of those algorithms are owned by big companies that don't want to share with us. And a lot of the science is actually done on static stimuli. So we had to develop some new methods for analyzing facial expressions. And this work was led by the brilliant L.U. Couve, who is a brilliant scientist and terrible pool player. And L.U. did what I can only describe as very cool maths. And he built a whole toolkit to analyze facial expressions and pull out all sorts of amazingly rich information from the movements of people's faces. And one really cool, unexpected detour that this took is that Jess Woodham's put us in touch with the National Police Chiefs Council, who are now helping us to use that toolkit for deepfake detection. So thank you to Jess, and thank you to Centre UB for funding Tim Murphy to do a PhD on this, because I think it's super cool stuff. So after that little detour of developing algorithms to analyze facial expressions, we then figured out that when you look at people's facial expressions, you could plot them in some sort of multidimensional space, and you would see that lots of people kind of do the same kind of thing with their face when they're expressing different emotions. You might say that some people are kind of like the population average. Sorry, Soph, I don't know if you've got population average facial expression. I had to choose someone. And, most people are kind of like somewhere around the average facial expression. And then some people do something that's a bit more like unique or idiosyncratic. Actually, my brother doesn't, I don't know. He's just had a few too many beers at my cousin's wedding. So there's quite some variation in what people do with their face. And what we found was that people that do the kind of population average thing with their face are their emotions are more readily recognized by other people, probably because of a kind of affective similarity. Like, you're better able to recognize people's expressions if they do something similar-ish to what you would do. What we also found was that autistic individuals were more likely to do more unique or idiosyncratic expressions, which were then harder for other people to recognize. Now, I think this finding is it's sort of not very surprising, is it? It's a bit one of those things where you're like, yeah, like obviously that was going to happen. But I also think that sometimes the value of science is to really just state things so that they land a little bit more. And what landed with me about this was just that, sometimes in your life, you look at someone, you look at their facial expressions or their body movements or whatever, and you just kind of think like, I don't know what you're thinking and feeling. But everybody has thoughts and feelings that they want to communicate to other people so that they can get their needs met. And sometimes we just need to spend a little bit more time trying to figure out, like, okay, so what do you do when you're expressing that thing? Or ask people, how are you feeling? So that's what landed with me from this project. And I just wanted to kind of emphasize that a bit. And the other thing that landed with me is that I think that there's quite a lot of exciting future research for us to do to understand, these people that are doing more unique things, Are they like the movers and shakers of society? Are they the people that we really want to watch on TikTok? Are they the people that have come up with like creative and contemporary dance styles? I don't know. So there's some interesting research to do there. We, off the back of that, did a lot more research about facial expressions and how we understand other people's facial expressions and how that depends on how we personally process emotions. I had to cut all these slides because the talk was just too long, but if you guys are interested in it, then please read one of these papers that Connor wrote. They're brilliant. So, our facial expressions are one way in which our movements are really important in social cognition. But I think our body movements are also really important in connecting with other people. For example, this is my best friend, Penny. And Penny supports South Africa, and she's watching the Rugby World Cup in 2023. And I reckon even if I blurred out Penny's facial expression here, you would be able to tell who won the World Cup in 2023 and how Penny feels about it just from looking at her body movements. This role that body movements play in communicating our emotions was really beautifully illustrated by Catherine Fleming on the left here when we collaborated for the Mindscapes exhibit in Galway. And Catherine really showed how high arousal emotions like anger, they kind of have a speed to them. Like the angry one is like coming at you out of the screen, whereas the sad one is holding back. It's a slow and small emotion. And Bianca Schuster, along with Claire Press and Rosie Eady, helped us to actually show this with some data in the lab. And what we showed was indeed that when people are expressing sadness, they walk quite slowly. And when people are expressing high arousal emotions like happiness or anger, they walk quite fast. Importantly, what we also found is that your interpretation of this depends on how you yourself move. So if you are someone that normally walks around quite slow in your everyday life, then when you see other slow walkers, you just think, yeah, looks normal, looks natural. You don't think that looks particularly sad. Whereas if you're someone that walks around really fast in your everyday life, then when you see someone walking slow, you think they must be really sad because you think, well, I'd only be moving that slow if I was devastated. So you use your own movements as a kind of benchmark against which to gauge other people's movements. And you're more likely to make the correct inference if they move similarly to how you move. We even showed this kind of effect of similarity when we took away all of the body cues, all of the hunching of the shoulders and stuff. And we did this hilarious experiment where we took the whiteboard. I mean, to be fair, I didn't do it. Claire and Rosie took the whiteboard off Claire's office wall and used it as a table, and then got people to move cardboard triangles around to animate different mental states, like coaxing, mocking, seducing, and surprising. And they did something that looked a bit like this. Yeah. So this is a coaxing one because the red triangle is like, come on, out of the enclosure. And then with Bianca Schuster, we showed that people are more accurate in labeling these sorts of videos if the video is doing something that they would have done when they were making the video themselves. So there's another effect of similarity there. You get the videos a bit more if it's similar to what you would have done. So to sum up, our movements are intricately linked with our social cognition. And in general, broad brush strokes, we are better at interpreting people if they move similarly to how we move. And I'd just like to say thank you here, massive thank you to Claire Press and Rosie Eady for the work that we've done together and all of the support along the way. And also, these studies were some of the first studies that I did when I came to Birmingham. So huge thanks to Chris Mile and Joe Gallier, because I didn't really know anyone when I came to Birmingham, and you guys welcomed me into your lab meetings, and I felt very welcome. And also I just learned loads about motor learning, so thank you. And also thank you to the Franklin Building Lunch Group, Caroline and Sarah and Ian and John. We had a little rule that you couldn't talk about science over lunch, which was great. It was a great way to actually meet colleagues and get to know people, and I'm really grateful for that. And thank you to Alan Wing and DR and Andrew Olson for all of the help with the movement recording side of things. Definitely couldn't have done that without you guys. Okay, so now I'm not allowed to leave until I've talked about dopamine, am I? So to talk about the dopamine part of this, I need to fill in this part of history, right? Because I did my PhD at UCL, and then we jumped forward 6 years to Birmingham, and in between, I went and studied dopamine. And the reason I studied dopamine is that at the end of my PhD, I had been finding that autistic people tend to move in a more jerky way. And I was like, why? Like, why would that be the case? And what I discovered when I was reading around was that we all move in a jerky way when we're little. Oops. We learn through our experience to make our movements more smooth and fluid. And, you know, we learn this through trial and error, through knocking into things, through banging into people. And we also learn it through watching the smooth and fluid movements of the adults around us. And so what is really important is that we learn from our individual experience, and we also learn from other people. So we engage in individual learning and social learning. So at the end of my PhD, I was like, I want to go somewhere where I can learn about individual and social learning and the role of dopamine, and the best lab in the world for doing that is Roshan Kool's lab. So I went to work with Roshan. And it was a great choice because I loved working with Roshan, and she was just an absolutely brilliant postdoctoral supervisor. And when I got to the Netherlands, I personally engaged in quite a lot of individual and social learning. So I decided that I really wanted to be accepted as a Dutch person. And I, looked around myself, engaged in social learning, and I decided that there were 3 things that were going to make me Dutch. The first thing is, obviously, I had to learn to ride my bike with no hands. The second thing is, level 2 Dutch, I had to learn to ride my bike with no hands and steer another bike alongside. More challenging, but doable, totally doable. And the third thing, level 3 Dutch, is that I had to be able to ride on the back of a friend's bike. Now, this sounds really simple, and you can do it in a British way by just plonking yourself on the back of your friend's bike and making them pedal as hard as they possibly can to get the bike going. But to do this in a truly Dutch way, what you have to do is your friends start cycling and you jog alongside, and at just the right time where they've picked up enough speed, but not too much speed, you jump and you just land like a cloud. That's how to be truly Dutch, and I never achieved it. I practiced a lot, but you have to be truly Dutch to be able to do this. So in addition to learning these essential skills, I also learned a lot about dopamine and a lot about learning. Now, dopamine is one of the brain's neurotransmitters. It's often referred to as the brain's teaching signal. And we knew from the literature at the time when I went to the Netherlands that dopamine is really important for individual learning. If you give people drugs that block dopamine receptors, then you affect their individual learning. They're learning from trial and error. But we didn't know how dopamine would be involved in social learning. And also, you might be like, well, why would it be any different? But in the literature at the time, there was this big debate. People were saying, look, we're social creatures. We've evolved to be social. Maybe we have different brain mechanisms for social learning, and maybe they're not dopamine dependent. So this wasn't something that we could just take for granted, and we had to test it. So Roshan and I, with Hanneke den Ouden, and Celia was also involved in this work. And then later I brought this work back to Birmingham and Alicia Robitsky led it. We did a series of studies where we looked at the role of dopamine in social and individual learning. And here's a picture of Alicia looking very smug, as she should be, because did some really great work in this area. And essentially, we found that both social and individual learning are affected if you give people dopaminergic drugs. And therefore, they both rely on common dopaminergic mechanisms. So that was cool. So then, at this point in my life, I was like, okay, so dopamine is important for social learning, but is dopamine just important for learning? Is it really the social bit? Is it just the learning bit? Like, does it actually play a role in social cognition more generally? And this question became really important to me after I went and did a little bit of shadowing with Hugh Rickards. And Hugh Rickards, thanks so much to Hugh for letting me do this. He runs the motor disorders clinic at the hospital here. And so he works with people with Parkinson's disease, people with Huntington's disease, people with Tourette syndrome. And what they were saying and what their families were saying is that they're supposed to be motor disorders. That's how they're called. But lots of people were saying that they had a lot of challenges with their social connections, with their relationships. And so we knew that for many of these clinical conditions, the dopamine system is somehow involved. So for example, in people with Parkinson's disease, there is a loss of dopamine neurons in a particular part of the brain. And Hugh's question for me was, is it really the dopamine that is playing a role in these social challenges? Or is it just that, you've just had a big diagnosis and your whole world is changing and, of course your relationships are going to change. So is it really the dopamine that's important here? And another bit of our research that was sort of like a bit pointing towards a role for dopamine and social cognition was that we were also doing these studies about honeybees. So these brilliant studies were led by Ian Traniello and Jean Robinson at the University of Illinois. And what they were doing was attaching tiny little barcodes to the back of honeybees so that we could track the bees' movements and look at their social interactions. And what we found was that some bees are really social bees. They have lots of social interactions with lots of other bees, and other bees prefer a more solitary life. And there are differences in gene expression between the social bees and the less social bees. And some of the genes that were differentially expressed are genes that are involved in the dopamine system. So we had like kind of a weak link there between social interaction and dopamine. But still, we didn't really know, like, does dopamine actually play a causal role in social cognition? And if it does, is it because dopamine affects people's movements? Like your movements are often affected if you get Parkinson's disease, for example. And does that then just have a knock-on effect on your social cognition? Because movements and social cognition, I just told you, are very much interrelated. So is dopamine actually independently contributing to social cognition, or is it just contributing via the movement system? So to unpack these kind of complicated questions, we did a series of studies where we gave people dopaminergic drugs and we looked at how that affected their behavior. The first thing that we wanted to do was look at the role of dopamine in complex and fluid movements, because we knew from the literature that dopamine is important in things like pressing a button, or maybe like swiping, like shooting through a target. But we didn't know if dopamine would be important in the more kind of complex and fluid movements that we might actually do in social interaction with each other. Lucky for us, we had the perfect paradigm for looking at complex and fluid movements. And so Lydia Hickman led a study where she gave people the drug haloperidol, which kind of lowers your dopamine levels, to put it crudely. And she also worked with Parkinson's patients, both on and off their dopaminergic medication. And poor Lydia did this in the lockdown. So she spent most of COVID running backwards and forwards to the post office, delivering tablets to people's houses. So thank you for the heroic efforts, Lydia. And what Lydia found was that basically, if we use Dagmar as an example, if Dagmar was given one of these drugs that lowers his dopamine levels, he would move more slowly, but he would also move at a more constant velocity. So not slowing down around the corners and speeding up for the straights quite as much. And so this means that dopamine not only plays a role in the speed of your movements, but also in the ongoing control of that speed. So now we knew, okay, dopamine plays a role in your movements, in your complex and fluid movements, but how is that linked to social cognition? And for this, Bianca Schuster led a number of studies where we gave people haloperidol, again, to lower their dopamine, and we gave them 2 of the tasks that I've already described to you. Now, to tell you what we thought would happen, I'm going to reuse this multidimensional space thing. So imagine that one dimension is in this multidimensional space is speed of movement. And we could plot everyone's movement in this space. So some people generally move quite slow, and some people generally move quite fast. It's absolutely cheating if you use a broomstick, but cute pictures anyway. And if we pulled somebody out in this multidimensional space and gave them this drug, it would make them move more slowly. And if the drug is affecting your social cognition because it's affecting your movements, it should be the case that now that person is better at interpreting the body language of the other slow people that are in that same part of space, but worse at interpreting the body language of the fast people. Right? Does that make sense? Cool. Yeah, that's not what we found. So what we actually found was that the dopaminergic drug, it did slow people down. And this must have been such an annoying study for Magda because we were doing it outside her office. So people were walking up and down outside Magda's office, and we gave them this drug that slows them down. She could never get in there. So yeah, thanks to Magda for being patient with us. So the drug made people walk more slowly. It made people move more slowly in many different ways. But it didn't make them better at then interpreting other slow people's movements. What it broadly did was make people less accurate on the social cognition tasks overall. It depended a bit on their baseline dopamine levels, but broadly speaking, it just sort of made them less accurate. And so what we concluded was that dopamine independently contributes to social cognition and to movement. And I guess I will just pause here to sort of say, okay, well, like, so what does this mean for us? And like, where are we going to take this forward? Well, the first thing is that it means that dopamine does play a causal role in social cognition. And this is a role that it plays that's separate from how it affects your body movements. And so that could be really important in helping us to better understand conditions like Parkinson's, like Huntington's, and like Tourette's. And so our future work is going to do more going in that direction. The second thing that we're going to do going forward, and thank you to Ping Chen for her help with on pushing this research agenda, is we're going to, we've been looking at some quite simplistic measures of social cognition here. So we want to look at more diverse measures, more real life measures of social cognition. And also, like, we've only looked at dopamine, like, what about serotonin? What about noradrenaline? How does that play into this? And the third thing that we want to do going forward is that we now know that dopamine plays an important role in social cognition, but what is dopamine doing that's affecting social cognition. And thanks to Alicia for some really great pilot data, which is showing us that dopamine seems to be affecting your timing. And it might even be affecting the speed at which you are taking information in from the world. And obviously that's going to have a big impact on your social cognition. And it's also going to have a big impact on the speed at which you do things. So we're interested in exploring how timing feeds into both social cognition and movement and how that's linked to dopamine. So I'm coming to the end, I'm wrapping up. And, you know, I really want to say huge thank you to Roshan Cools and her team. There are a lot of people involved in these drug studies. Hanneke den Ouden played a massive role, and Celia Hayes also played a big role. And you guys, like, in addition to, you know, like making the studies possible, you guys have always really challenged me, like challenged my thinking, made me think harder and sharper, and I am really grateful for it. So thank you for that. Thank you to the people that did the B work, Ian, Mike, Jean, and Tim in particular. And, you know, these studies were led by Lydia and Bianca and Alicia, but like huge thank you to Sophie Sad and Carvalho, because these were the first drug studies that my lab group did here in Birmingham. And Sophie did a tremendous amount of work to enable us to set up the drug studies and make sure they were running smoothly. So thanks, Soph. And just like a sort of broader thank you to everyone in the department and, well, you know, the university in general, really. I've always loved working here. I think it's a really collegiate university. I think people really help each other. And I've been helped by so many different colleagues, both academic staff, but also professional services staff. You know, to do these sorts of studies, there's a lot of legal stuff we need to do. You need the ethics for it. You need people to help you to secure the funding and then actually get the money and figure out how you spend it and claim it back. And it's just, you know, there's a lot that goes on. A lot of people that don't get their names on the papers that are doing a lot of work behind the scenes. And I really want to say a big thank you to all of those people. And also another thing that I really love about working here at the university is that I've always had really good bosses. So Kim Shapiro was really instrumental in like making me feel well. Ed and Suzanne have always like been champions and cheerleaders. Like I feel like there's been quite a lot of times where I've been like, I don't think I can do it. And I've been cheered on. So thank you very much for that. And then more recently, I've been working with Bill and Richard in my college role. And I had a lot to learn in my college role, a lot of stuff that was new for me. And they have been so kind and supportive and generous with their time. So I want to say a big thank you for that. And very importantly as well, my college role, I definitely could not do it without Victoria Sharp and Jasmine Penny. So thank you very much to Victoria and Jasmine. A final thanks is also to Catherine Fleming. You have seen a lot of Catherine's work, this beautiful artwork that's sort of been popping up on some of the slides. And Catherine has been doing a series of paintings that are kind of related to the work that we've been doing in the lab. And we'll be doing an exhibition probably next year. Details to be confirmed. And I will send these details around so that you can come if you would like to. Okay, so in the last few minutes, I just wanted to sort of like bring this to a close and like reflect a little bit, because I started by saying that I was a bookworm. And I guess when I was younger, I think this is very understandable. I think I sort of wanted to learn about social interaction and social relationships by reading books and doing experiments. And I think that's very understandable, because like our social relationships with each other, like building good, nurturing, long-lasting social relationships are, I think, probably the hardest thing that we do as humans. And so I get it. Like, little Jen, of course, wants to learn how to do that from books and experiments. And what a joy it is now to be able to reflect on my career and to think what I have learned about building good, strong, nurturing social relationships. Now, some of that I did learn from reading and from doing experiments, and I tried to summarize a bit of that now. But obviously, most of it I actually learned from living and being in social relationships. So I learned it, you know, from being a daughter and a granddaughter and an auntie, and seeing how social relationships change and flex as people leave us, sadly, and as new little people join families, and how love grows and changes. And I just want to say thank you to my family for all the love and all the support over the years. I also learned a lot about social relationships from having amazing friends. Like, I really have friends who they're always striving to be better friends, to ask, like, how can we connect more? Even when things are tough, like, how can we have more connection and how can we strengthen our bond? I've become friends with lots of people that I've worked with, and I've name dropped a lot of people throughout. But there are some people who I don't work with who I'm also friends with. Wild, I know. So I do want to name drop as well. Penny, Joel, Charlotte, Emma, Rebecca, Vanessa, Mary, another Charlotte, and also Alicia. And thank you, Alicia, for introducing me to my folk family who are here in the middle. I always feel so supported by you guys. And I know sometimes I do like a teenage thing where I'm like, I'm going for a gap year. And you guys are like, yeah, we'll be here when you get back. So thank you for all the ongoing love and support. It really means a lot to me. And finally, I have learned so much about building good, long-lasting, nurturing social relationships from my lab group, of course. You know, I learned a lot through trying to be a good supervisor and failing. Sometimes, I think sometimes I've done all right. But, you know, I've always had people around me who are kind enough and gentle enough to help me see how our relationship could be better, you know, how we could be connecting more and making more kind of, I don't know, like honest connections. Like Bill said at the beginning, I am just so proud of my lab group. I'm so proud of everything that you guys have achieved. I think that you are like just brilliant scientists and also just lovely people. And I just love the way that you help each other and support each other to learn all of the time. And I thank my lucky stars every day that I get to work with you guys. So thank you. And so to summarize, yeah, I learned a lot more about social interaction through my work than I could have done sitting in Ilkeston Library. And I guess I also learned as well that maths is cool. And thank you all for listening. And oh, a last massive thank you to all the funders for enabling this work. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that wonderful lecture, Jen. So I'm Suzanne Higgs and I'm head of the School of Psychology, and it really is my pleasure today to be able to give this vote of thanks to Professor Jennifer Cook following her fantastic inaugural lecture. And they really are so special, these occasions, and, you know, actually very moving and emotional as well, and a very special opportunity for us to celebrate a significant milestone, and of course gathering friends, family and colleagues around us as well. So today, Jen has really taken us on an immensely fascinating journey through her research, starting out from her early work on imitation and body movements, moving on then to discovering how we move affects our connection with others, and telling us, of course, about the important role of dopamine, not just in movement, but also in social cognition. And of course, now we're hearing about the exciting work that she's doing to explore how dopamine might influence both, but actually through something else entirely, and perhaps that thing is timing. So we've got a sense from her lecture that in Jen's research, there has been this really clear direction of travel. But I think actually that is only apparent because of Jen's amazing ability to see links between things that nobody else can see. So I think it appears to be very smooth, but actually it really is an incredible journey there that she has been able to go on and discover all of these connections. So I think what we've heard today is that Jen has this talent for devising innovative experiments. She tests out entirely new ideas and builds up a very robust and precise evidence base that really has changed the way that we think about the factors that shape our social world. And not only that, it's really now leading to real world impacts. So she's a truly creative thinker. And one of the things that I'm always so impressed by is her endless curiosity and the fact that she's just so excited about all aspects of psychology. And of course, this enthusiasm really is infectious. And I think we've really got a sense of that today from her lecture. And so it's absolutely no surprise that she, of course, have talked about her team with great affection, but they absolutely love her. So we know that she really is an outstanding scientist, but she's also a role model mentor as well, who really revels in interdisciplinary research. She's also won other awards for excellence in supervision, testament obviously to the fact that she is able to draw out the best in her team and ensure that she has this really supportive environment that allows them to achieve the best that they possibly can. And this interdisciplinary aspect of her work, I think, is clear in the impressive range of methods that she's used. We've heard about some of those today. But I also did want to mention the work that she's done as the Deputy Director of Research for our college, because in this capacity, she really has brought together many different researchers from all across the university, and they've been exploring really important research challenges from a huge number of different angles, and this has fostered new collaborations. So we heard at the beginning as well, and also from Jen herself, that actually her interest in movement in a social context does extend beyond her own research. And I think we can also say reaches out to her interest and love of partying. So Jen is the driving force behind our fabulous annual Christmas get-together, which is actually such a fabulous occasion where, you know, musical talents of our members of our school are shown off, and really everyone gets on the dance floor. So this year, I'm definitely looking forward to Jen's debut performance at the Christmas party. I think we can all say that that would be absolutely amazing. And so I want to finish with thanking Jen really for sharing your work and your enthusiasm today. And it's been an absolute joy. Thank you. So if you haven't signed the certificate that is at the front there, please do that and also join us in the Lapworth for some refreshments. Hope to see you all there.